How does the Marshall DSL-20 sound? Well, at least it doesn't sound like dial-up. How does the Marshall DSL-20 sound for metal? What's up, y'all? It's Goose. Today we're going to go over the Marshall DSL-20 and how it sounds from metal. Also, this is the first tube amp on this series. And in this series, I'm going to try to create sort of a visual representation of what this amp sounds like. We're going to go over what the setup is, how I would dial in the amp, and how the amp sounds in the bass, mids, and treble, as well as the gain structure of the amp. If you like what you see here, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It greatly helps my channel. I'm trying to grow this as big as I can. So any interaction would be greatly appreciated. All right, so the DSL-20 is kind of that current crop of the 20-watt Marshalls that they've been releasing as their studio series. This one's a little different in that it's not made in UK like the other ones are. And the DSL is loosely derived from the JCM 2000 era of amp. And the JCM 2000 has been used by apparently a bunch of artists that are probably better known for other amps. I think it's a great amp though. Today's setup is going to be my Kiesel Osiris with DiMarzio illuminators in the bridge, going into a J Rocket Archer clean for a boost, into the Marshall DSL-20, into the Sir Reactive IR, and that's going into my Fractal where there's a IR running, which is the Ownhammer rectifier mic'd to the 57. All right, so with that out of the way, let's dial in this amp. All right, so no boost, everything at noon sounds kind of like this. All right, so the first thing I noticed is that this amp is a lot more saturated than like a JCM 800. It actually already has a lot of gain on tap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll up the gain and I'm going to roll down the resonance actually a little bit because I feel like it's a little bit kind of flubby in the bottom already. All right, so that kind of balance actually sounds really good to me already. So let's start with kind of playing around with the EQ settings a little bit. So on the bass, I'm gonna do a really quick sweep of the bass. So around 10 o'clock on the dial, the bass seems to come in, and then it doesn't really seem to do much more after that. So like this is 12, and this is maxed out. So there's not really that much happening with this bass. Although, since there's not that much range, it doesn't really matter, but 1 o'clock sounds best to me. And on the mid, with at minimum, you can go from a very scoop sound to a very boxy kind of sound. I'm going to leave the mid somewhere around 11 o'clock. That anywhere past noon, you're going to get kind of this like slight boxiness to it. And I kind of prefer more of an open sound. So I'm going to keep this around 11 o'clock a bit. And the treble actually has a good amount of range too. So even with the treble maxed out, I've actually noticed that this amp doesn't get particularly searing. It's nothing like a JCM 800 where if you don't crank the volume, you just get like a super bright tone. After about 1 o'clock on that dial, it actually gets kind of this nice crunch to it. Like you'll hear like the texture of the tone. That's actually like a really nice breakup. But let's see how the presence affects how bright this amp can get. So the Presence doesn't seem like it has that much range either. I'm going to keep this around 1 o'clock. And we're going to keep the treble right where it was. All right, and then there's a tone shift button here. Don't use this button. It kind of sucks. You're going to be missing a lot of the punch of the mid-range of this amp if you use that tone shift, so I don't recommend it unless you're really going for that scooped sound. All right, so last thing, if you move the gain up on this amp, it gets really flubby really quick. I like to keep it around 1 o'clock here. And then we're going to add a boost. And the boost is adding a lot of gain, so I'm going to move the gain down to about 12. So yeah, that sounds pretty good to my ears. So the resonance knob can get really unruly really quickly if you have it like maxed out. All the way until 1 o'clock, it just gets kind of unusable in my opinion. I think 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock is about right for that. All right, so how does it sound? Starting with the bass. So without a boost, I actually don't think this amp gets really all that tight. For rock tones, I think it works pretty well. And there's some satisfying compression to it, like there's a bit of a squish to it. But on its own, I don't feel like it's a tight amp. It's actually not like the loosest amp that I've tried because it doesn't really have like a really big bass presence either, but it's also not really that tight. So on this chart, I'd put this close to loose. Again, you can definitely get it to be tight with a boost, and it doesn't really have that much bass, so you don't have to boost that much to get it to be tight. But on its own, I would never call this a tight amp. All right, so for the mids, I actually think this amp sounds the best when you give it a little bit of a scoop. If you push the mids too far, you can get this kind of weird boxy sound, which isn't that different from like a JCM 800, but I don't think it sounds nearly as good as a JCM 800 when you push the mids on this thing. But because the mid control actually has a lot of range, you can get it to do all sorts of sounds for your setup. You can actually hit a really good sweet spot where it sounds open, but has a punchiness to it. So actually, because of how much of a range that mid knob has, I think I would put this right in the middle of this triangle here. I do want to say that that tone shift really just destroys the mids in this amp, so I would just recommend not using it at all. What I find really cool about this amp is that I feel like there's a lot of top-end information coming through. Even if you max out like the treble and the presence style, it doesn't really become harsh. It just kind of becomes aggressive, or I guess even abrasive. It just feels like a grind happening, which I'm sure someone could use that tone. It doesn't feel completely unusable. even when you roll down the high end on most of these knobs, you have to get pretty far down for it to no longer have that like high end information I was talking about. So I would actually put this high end kind of in like an airy space on this triangle, because it always has those harmonics up top and it's never really unclear, but it's also never really like sharp. And I think that's really, really awesome because it can do that like really mid-rangey crunch punch. It can really do that mid-range punch to cut through the mix, but it also has that like detailed air on the top end. All right, so the gain of this amp is actually kind of crazy because it's a lot more saturated than what I remember from both the JCM 800 as well as my Friedman back there. All throughout the gain dial, you get this like squish feeling from the amp. It's not really that quite dry gain sound either. There's definitely a little bit more saturation here, but it's also not a completely like super wet saturation like on a 5150. And when you push this past 3 o'clock, you can definitely get some of that like squishiness to fuzz out a little bit. And then you kind of get a little bit of fuzziness, kind of like other Marshalls I've tried. And also why you see Marshalls used alongside oranges a lot of times with the sludgier tones. But I'm going to put this somewhere closer to kind of a wet distortion with a little bit of fuzz on this triangle. If you want a super percussive sound, this might not be the amp for you, although you can kind of coax it to do that. It just won't be the most defined in that region, but it is also very like forgiving, and because of the high saturation, I think it's a very fun amp to play through. All right, so hopefully this gives you a good visual representation on how the DSL-20 sounds. As for my thoughts, it's a very versatile little amp. So even though it doesn't excel at any one thing, in my opinion, it can kind of do a little bit of everything. But I guess in some ways you can think about it as a Marshall that can do those things, but also have a little bit more gain on tap, which is kind of unlike other Marshalls I've tried, like a JCM 800 or a Plexi, where you have to push the master to get it to not be bright and thin. Whereas this can really just do a whole range of tones, even if it doesn't necessarily sound as clear or as defined as those other amps do. But in my opinion, it can definitely keep up with all those amps. So yeah, hope y'all enjoyed this video. I will be on vacation for a little bit, but once I'm back, we're going to be ramping up the videos once again. And I think I have one more video coming during this vacation. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Later!